Joining us now is Representative Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana. He serves as the vice chair for the Republican Conference, also a member of the Judiciary Subcommittee on Constitution, Civil Rights, and Civil Liberties. Good morning, sir.
Hey, Pedro. Great to be with you.
Your state, where does it stand when it comes to trigger laws regarding abortion, and considering the decision by the Supreme Court on Roe v. Wade?
Yeah, in Louisiana, we like to pride ourselves on being a pro-life state. We have for a long, long time. 2006, we passed the trigger law. 2020, we passed a constitutional amendment to the state constitution to further ensure that. So it would be a pro-life jurisdiction, except that the trigger law has been challenged, and so it's tied up in state courts at the moment. I think ultimately that'll be resolved in a couple of weeks, and then we'll be able to enforce the law.
What's the challenge that's being brought forth against the law?
The plaintiffs, I believe, have made a disingenuous claim. They say that the trigger law is vague, and they just can't possibly understand how that would be enforced. I think that's a legal fiction. The people that are making that argument argued against it in detail when it was being passed through the legislative process. So I think it'll be resolved pretty quickly. This is an overwhelming consensus of our state, and you know, we have the right to do that now.
If the law does go into effect, what exactly does it cover?
Well, there's an exception for life of the mother, but we would otherwise be a pro-life jurisdiction, and that's always been the sentiment of our folks. It's a very conservative state. They believe in God and country and traditional values, and this is right in line with that.
As far as access for those who may not have those beliefs, where do they turn to, and what kind of message is delivered as far as their ability to resolve these issues? Well,
look, we believe in the sanctity of every single human life, and we've had a lot of these debates in the Judiciary Committee over the last couple of weeks, and ultimately what we have to acknowledge is this is an unborn child. It's not a blob of tissue. It's not a clump of cells. In 1973, when Roe was handed down, that's what they told everyone. But now we have medical technology. We have 4D ultrasounds. We can see that this is a tiny person. And so that's a very important issue. There'll be jurisdictions, of course, that go the other direction, and those options are out there. But in our state, the people have spoken repeatedly and decisively, as recently as I said in 2020, to amend the state constitution. So this is how our state feels.
2 votes last week on this topic, on 2 pieces of legislation. Where'd you stand on those?
I support the sanctity of life all the way. I think the Democrats are doing a lot of fear-mongering right now. They're trying to delegitimize the Supreme Court and stoke fear in the hearts of Americans. I don't think that's right. Look, there never was a right to abortion in the Constitution. It's not in its text, its structure, its meaning. The court finally acknowledged that after almost 50 years of this atrocity, and it was a long time coming. That decision devolves to the people and their individual states, and the states get to make that decision.
Our guest with us until 8:30. If you want to ask him questions, you can do so. 202-748-8000 for Democrats, 202-748-8001 for Republicans, and 202-748-8002 for independents. You can also text us at 202-748-8003. Do you think the Supreme Court's decision on Roe extends to other things like same-sex marriage, right to contraception, those kind of things?
Very clearly it does not, and Alito made that crystal clear in his decision. He specified this only applies to abortion, as it is its own area of the law, and he said anybody that says otherwise, I'm paraphrasing him, is that's a misplaced concern. Even Justice Thomas, in his concurrence, said, I agree with that. Abortion is different. And so those who would suggest otherwise apparently haven't read the opinion, or they're trying to use it for political partisan purposes.
And even Justice Thomas talking about Obergefell and things like that and what should be reconsidered. No concerns from that as well?
It's an academic discussion and about substantive due process, and that's a whole different subject. But he said, page 119, everybody look it up, he said, I agree with what Justice Alito said. Abortion is different, and this doesn't apply to anything else.
Some legislation stemming from that, even today, a vote on same-sex marriage, or at least preserving that. Can you tell us about what's expected and where do you stand on that?
Look, I'm against it. Again, this is fear-mongering. The Democrats are trying to delegitimize the Supreme Court. They've been doing this consistently. They wanted to pack it. They brought legislation to try to put 4 liberal justices on the court because they're concerned about the conservative majority. Chuck Schumer infamously stood out on the steps just a few blocks from here and called out Justices Kavanaugh and Gorsuch by name, said that we will release the whirlwind, which of course led to the protests on their front lawns and even an assassination attempt on Justice Kavanaugh. This is very serious stuff, and so now they're using legislative measures to try to do this. Again, they're ignoring intentionally the language that I just cited out of the Supreme Court's opinion, and they're doing it for partisan purposes. Not only they're trying to delegitimize the court, they're also trying, of course, to distract from their policy failures, which is what most of America is concerned about: inflation, immigration, incompetence. the three I's, I call it. That's what this election is going to be about this fall, and the Democrats can't argue about their policies or any successes they've had, so they have to turn to these other measures and try to distract the people. I don't think it's going to work.
And on that same vein, something included the Right to Contraception Act also being considered.
Same thing. There is no jeopardy whatsoever about that in the law. Democrats know that. The people that are bringing these bills are smart folks, but they're using it to score political points, and that's unfortunate. We have lots of crises to work on in this country, and they're distracting the people, and they're wasting our time doing these things.
On the pregnancy front, or at least the pregnant mothers front, you have something called the Unborn Child Support Act. What would that do?
Yeah, it's a bicameral piece of legislation we filed end of last week in the House and the Senate. Senator Kramer of North Dakota is bringing it in the Senate. We have lots of co-sponsors on this. It's a common sense measure. We just say that a pregnant mother should be able to seek child support for the unborn child, dating all the way back to the moment of conception as determined by a physician. So if she so chooses, this would allow her to go and seek child support in a local court, just like it would be done in any other scenario. And you would have a paternity test in that scenario. Look, fatherhood is an important thing. We've lost sight of that. We have an epidemic of fatherlessness, and that's a root cause of so many of society's ills. Costs are incurred in carrying a child to term and delivering that baby, and we believe the father should be involved if the mother so chooses to do that.
Representative Mike Johnson with us for this time. We have calls lined up for you. Our first call is from Stephanie. Stephanie joins us from Brooklyn, New York, Democrats line. You're on with our guest. Stephanie, go ahead with your question or comment, please.
Yes, good morning. How are you doing this morning?
Hey, Stephanie, good.
All right, I'm calling because I do have concern when it comes to Roe v. Wade. I think that most of you Republican men are getting it wrong. We are living in a new century. We have newer views. We have smarter views. Y'all talk as if we don't know what we're doing. We as women don't know how to control our body. And the Republican men are trying to tell us what to do with our bodies. But y'all cannot do that. And your state is one of the poorest states as far as helping out a mother and a child. Y'all deny the child care credit. Y'all don't have Medicaid in your state. Most of the mortality in Louisiana is terrible when it comes to women's health. Let me tell you something. One day, walk into one of those lower neighborhoods in your state and speak to those mothers.
Okay.
And find out how can they care for their children.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. Thank you.
Yeah, look, Stephanie, those are valid concerns. I do go in those neighborhoods. We do have Medicaid in Louisiana, and some of those facts are off. We do have, very sadly, unfortunately, a high infant mortality rate, but there's a lot of societal factors that are involved in that. Look, I'm an advocate in Congress, as many of the pro-life leaders are in my state and across the country, of improving that social safety net. In other words, we need to support unwed mothers in particular, mothers who are carrying their children to term. If they're going to go for adoption or some of the other options, we have to allow them more assistance. And there's a broad network of ways to do that. We can do it through the private sector, through churches, nonprofits, et cetera. But we've got to make sure that we protect these mothers and allow them the ability to carry their children, unborn children, to term. And we're working on that. There's legislation filed even in the last week in the House and the Senate to do that. This bill that we just discussed that I filed is one measure in that regard. And so I appreciate your views. Look, we have the ability to disagree, but the plain meaning of the decision in Dobbs is the obvious, and that is that the Constitution does not speak to abortion. And by definition, then, that means that it devolves to a decision of the people, and that's how our country works, and we ought to celebrate it.
She talked about child care support. Does your state offer that?
Of course, yeah, we do. There need to be enhanced measures, I think, to protect women who are particularly in crisis pregnancy situations. But there's a lot of good work being done on that front, and I think you'll see many of those measures advance over the next couple months and couple years.
From Louisiana in Winfield, independent line, Bobby, go ahead.
Does your state offer that?
Bobby in Winfield, hello. You're on. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Representative Johnson. I belong to a fraternal organization, the 50 Black Vietnam Vets of Central Louisiana. And what we're concerned with is this lean and stuck in the mud on this voting conservative in the state of Louisiana. We declare that voting conservative in the state of Louisiana has been holding this state back, as well as the people back, for 50 years. We're the second poorest state in the union. We have every kind of disease there is. We lead the country in heart disease, cancer, diabetes, all of the crime statistics. We're right at the top with some of the biggest states like New York and Texas. I'm trying to figure out what benefit has it done for the state of Louisiana to keep voting conservative, whether it be blue dog Democrat or Republican. It doesn't show up in the statistics. We are second, 1 out of 4 Louisianans are illiterate. So give me some reason why we should keep sending people. Look, another question, why did you vote against the infrastructure bill? We have some of the worst highways in the country, some of the worst bridges in the country. It would have brought millions of dollars into the state, hundreds, maybe thousands of good paying jobs. Why in the world would anybody vote against that when you're coming from the second poorest state in the union?
Okay, caller, thank you.
You gave me a lot to work with there, my friend. Thanks for your service in Vietnam. Listen, we could have a long conversation about this, and I would love to do that. The problem we have in Louisiana, not to get too parochial about this, is that we do not have a conservative structure and a conservative history for the last 50 years. To the contrary, we're still living in the shadow of Huey Long, and he was almost a socialist, right? Our whole system of government is built in that framework, and so we have a highly centralized hub of power in Baton Rouge where all the taxpayer dollars are raked in and then they're sent out in patronage around the state. That model doesn't work. We need to run our state like Texas does, our neighbor to the west. That's why we have a Texodus of people moving over there, because their business climate and everything about their culture is better in terms of economics. So they have more jobs, more innovators, more risk takers are able to expand their businesses and do better for the people. That's a long-term conversation that we can have. And look, we just now have a conservative majority, really, in both houses of the legislature. We still have a Democrat governor, as you well know. If we had a true conservative leadership in the state for a sustained period, we could fix this, because we go back to those core principles. Real quickly, the reason I voted against the infrastructure bill is because it really wasn't that. A very, very small percentage of those dollars would actually come to Louisiana, and we're concerned about the trajectory of spending for the federal government. We have a $30 trillion federal debt. This is not the time to be dropping cash out of helicopters. That's why we have the inflation rate right now that is just terribly destructive for all hardworking families in our state and elsewhere. So again, we could have long substantive conversations about all these issues. I appreciate your concern, but we've got to look into the details of these things, because that's what matters.
From John, he's in Texas, Republican line. Hi.
Good morning, Congressman.
Morning.
I have 2 points.
Okay.
Number one, Democrats always say, keep the government out of the bedroom. Well, that's kind of laughable, because when they get pregnant in the bedroom, they want the government to come back in and pay for it with Medicaid, meaning my tax dollars, not theirs. So I have a solution. You have a lot of elderly people in this country on Social Security, and they have to pay $120 or $150 a month for their Medicare, and they have to purchase a supplement on top of that. Well, why can't you make people on Medicaid pay the exact same thing as the elderly instead of sticking it to the elderly? Sounds reasonable to me. If you're on getting free government health care, you ought to pay something instead of having kids and kids and kids and living off the government. Thank you, Congressman.
Well, that's an intriguing comment and thought. Look, I do think that we have to analyze these social safety nets that we have in the country. It's part of who we are in America, and there's no conservative that I know that argues against, no one wants to eliminate the safety net programs, but the reality is they're headed towards bankruptcy. In just a few number of years, Social Security goes belly up. So does Medicare, Medicaid, all of these big spending programs, because we're drowning in debt. And so we've got to think about long-term reforms to those programs so that we can keep them. This is really an existential kind of threat to a lot of people in the country, and so we've got to work on that. They're intended to be a temporary hand up. When I mean Medicaid, for example, it's supposed to be a hand up to help someone until they can get back on their feet. And it was never intended to be a permanent way of life. Social Security is not an entitlement because it's a contract you make with the government. But we've got to shore up these programs to ensure that they're there for those that need them, and we've got a long way to go in that regard.
What reforms would you advocate for on those program fronts?
Well, you know, it's interesting. There's a lot of proposals on the table that are being discussed, but Social Security, for example, if you just change eligibility age, and I don't mean like for people that are going to have that on the near horizon. I mean, if you tell 30-year-olds, 35-year-old workers that they're going to get it at age 67 instead of 65, for example, you can dramatically change the trajectory of the sustainability of those programs. When Social Security was created in the 60s, the average lifespan was just somewhere in the mid-70s. Now people live to be 100 routinely, so they're on the program for decades when it was never structured to be able to do that. And so we have to make some very difficult policy decisions now. We can't kick the can down the road another 10 years. This is something that really has begun in earnest, and I hope that we'll have the grown-ups in the room that are willing to do that.
And Medicare, Medicaid?
Well, the same problem is, you know, there's a lot of fraud in the Medicaid system, and Louisiana is a terrible, you know, outlier, an example for this. 10, 15% of Medicaid dollars are wasted in fraud. We need much greater oversight. We need much tighter controls. And we need to make sure that those dollars are theirs again for those that desperately need them. It has an important role, an important function, but it's not going to be there for those folks if we can't get a hold of this. So there's a lot of good reform ideas and oversight proposals, and we've got to debate those in regular order and figure out what we're going to do.
Mary up next from Massachusetts, Democrats line. Hi.
Hi. I'm just calling about abortion, and the Roe v. Wade, the overturn of Roe v. Wade. And already that women have been endangered because when they had a miscarriage or an ectopic pregnancy, the doctors were not sure that they were able to help them legally. And one woman lost a liter of blood while she was waiting for them to try to figure out what they could do for her and what they could not do for her for fear of breaking the recent law in their state. So you've put millions of women in danger. Many of them will be kids, teenagers. I understand that a recent woman was actually a 10-year-old. A 10-year-old is not a woman. A 10-year-old is a kid, a child. You're putting these females in danger of their lives. And I know someone who died during a botched illegal abortion the year I got out of high school. And it was one of the worst things that happened during my teenage years. And it suddenly opened my eyes to the way women were treated and regarded before Roe v. Wade.
Mary, thank you very much for the question or the comments to our guest.
Thank you, Mary. Before I got into Congress, I practiced law for 20 years, did constitutional law and pro-life litigation, and I actually represented a number of women who were terribly harmed by botched abortions inside abortion clinics, the shoddy abortion clinics in my state. So abortion is a dangerous procedure. It has long-term negative health consequences on many, many women in terms of mental health and other health outcomes. All of this is shown. If you go to the obstetricians and gynecologists who are pro-life, they will give you the real data on that. Now, these anecdotal stories about persons losing liters of blood because their physicians are not sure about handling a miscarriage or ectopic pregnancy, I've not seen that substantiated anywhere, and I can't believe that that would be true. Anyone who practices in this area would understand that you protect the health of the mother. Every pro-life jurisdiction in every state allows for that exception. And so I think that's going to be the rule of the day, and I think people will understand that, and ultimately we are going to save millions of lives. Since 1973 in Roe v. Wade, 63 million unborn American children lost their lives because of this legal fiction that the Supreme Court pushed upon the country. Look, I'm 50 years old. I was born exactly a year earlier than Roe. I was born in January 72. Roe was in January 73. If you look at the numbers, 63 million represents about a third of my generation. So as I tell groups that I speak to, if you're younger than the age 50, your high school class, by way of example, should have been almost a third larger than it was, but your classmates weren't there because they weren't allowed to be born because of the law in this country. So I am grateful. We celebrate the overturning of Roe and the returning of this decision to the people, and I think ultimately that's going to be good for our nation, and I think God's going to bless it, to be honest.
There's a group in Louisiana called Louisiana Progress. You may be familiar with it. The head is Michelle Flournoy. She had a recent piece in the Baton Rouge Advocate. She said many women who seek abortions do so because of financial uncertainty and their inability to care for the child. If it's about the unborn babies, those babies need to be fed, housed, cared for, and educated. Help women and their families by raising the minimum wage and then provide access to paid maternity leave and health insurance. She goes on from there, but what about that argument?
Yeah, look, I'll tell Melissa, as I tell everyone, those are important debates about social safety nets. We've talked about it multiple times here this morning. But we don't kill a child because we're afraid that they may be in poverty. We have a vibrant abortion service in Louisiana. We have foster families. We have a broad network of crisis pregnancy centers around the state. I used to be legal counsel for a number of those groups. They do exceptional work. There's 2,700 crisis pregnancy centers, care pregnancy centers around the country. They serve millions of women every year. They're supported by 10,000 medical professionals. They do vital work. They need more funding. They need more volunteers. They need more help. And I think they're going to get that in the days ahead. So we'll all deal with this together. But to say that we're going to have to work harder to save more lives, to me, I'll take that challenge. In
Virginia, this is Anat in Dumfries, Independent Line.
Yes, what I can say, I don't thank you for. It's the first time I'm a CSPAN fan. It's the first time I call. I really want to talk to the congressman, have my opinion heard. I'm a mother of 3. I'm a pro-choice. I don't believe in abortion. I'm not a faith person. I believe in, in life. That's my choice. I choose to have my children. I love them dearly. And then my question to you, sir, for a woman, as a mom, as my experience, I'm 43 years old. As a mom, I make a lot of sacrifice. As an immigrant, when I come to this country, I believe in education. I went back to school. And then I make some sacrifices to know that there's certain thing, there's certain goal I have to put on hold. Or perhaps forget about them, just I can be a mother, because I think it's the best thing a woman can, a best thing that can happen to any woman. And I'm saying also there's for some women out there who never have that experience, maybe a medical condition, anything. I mean, I feel like every woman who born, they are mothers. They're probably taking care of a family member, and nephews, and things. My question to you, for birth control, I know it's the issues. I remember after I have my second child, I didn't want, because I don't believe in abortion. And I know if I have another child, I won't be able to, it would be really hard for me. That would be straight poverty. So I say, if I get pregnant, I'm going to have a baby. There's no question about that. So I was able to put an IUD to all of this, so I didn't get pregnant.
So caller, for the sake of time, what is the question for our guest?
My question for the guest, do you think men, for instance, because a woman, you can get pregnant maybe I don't know, I'm not a medical professional, maybe twice in the month or once in the month when you're ovulating, but a male can get many women pregnant in a day. Congressman, do you think males should take contraception?
Okay, thank you.
Not sure about that. That's a personal choice. And I'm not a medical doctor either. I'm just a lawyer, so I wouldn't delve into that area. But I will tell you that what you described there is a great blessing. Being a mother, it does have immeasurable value, and I'm glad that you have the opportunity to do that. Contraception, if anyone has told you, it's not under any legal jeopardy. Everyone's still going to have that ability, and there is no policy, prescription, or idea anywhere that I've even heard of anybody proposing that be taken away. So if anybody tells you otherwise, they're not shooting straight with you.
Now, you put that under the umbrella of personal choice. Do you put abortion under the umbrella of personal choice as well?
No, because abortion is its own, as the Supreme Court acknowledges, its own area. You're taking the life of another person. That's a very different matter, and that's why it's treated differently in the law.
From Jean in Michigan. Hi, in Kalamazoo, Republican line.
Hi. No one ever brings this up, but our unborn are actually protected in the Constitution. If you read the preamble, it is part of it is, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity.
Right.
And our unborn are our posterity. So abortion never should have been legal, not ever. But no one ever brings that up, that they are protected under our Constitution. That's all I have to say.
It's a great point, but even before that, more fundamental than that, in our nation's birth certificate, the Declaration of Independence, we say it right in the beginning, in the second paragraph, that it is a self-evident truth. We boldly proclaimed it's a self-evident truth that all of us are made by God. It says that we're all created equal, not born equal, created equal. We believe, and the founders believe, made in God's image. And because of that, every single person has inestimable dignity and value. And your value is not related in any way to the color of your skin or what zip code you live in or how good looking you are, how talented you are. It's all irrelevant. Your value is inherent. The founders of our country believe, because it is given to you by your Creator. And so that's a central premise and a foundational principle of our country. It's stated right there at the very beginning, and we defend that. I think that's our responsibility to do that. And as policymakers, to defend innocent life should be the first and most essential job we have.
Being the vice chair of the Republican conference, should Republicans take over the House next year after the midterm elections, what can we expect as far as the goals that the Republican conference will have, or the Republicans should, if they take power?
Great question, and you teed us up for an announcement we'll be making in the next couple of weeks. We're going to roll out, everybody remembers the Contract with America from the 90s with Newt Gingrich when the Republicans took over the House for the first time in 40 years. We're going to have the commitment to America, same idea, and there'll be a bullet points list of the top priorities. We have a lot of things to work on and to fix. There's a crisis on every front. We have unified government right now, as you remember from civics class. Democrats are in charge of the White House and both houses of Congress, and I think the American people have seen where that's led us. We have every front, economy, inflation, you're talking about supply chains, military recruitment, crime, the border. There's a crisis everywhere you look. We have to fix all that. We have a responsibility, and we have to do it in short order. Now, here's the big question. Joe Biden will still be in the White House, apparently, for 2 years after we take the majority. Will he work with us, as Bill Clinton did with Gingrich and the Republican majority in the 90s, and moderate his views and try to get some things done to help the country? Or will Joe Biden dig his heels in and stick with this European-style socialist dream they're working on right now? I hope that his better angels prevail and that we're able to work together and get some things done. The country desperately, desperately needs it.
What's top priority in that commitment?
Well, look, I did town halls all week before last back in Louisiana, and there are 3 refrains I hear everywhere. I call them the 3 I's. I mentioned it earlier. It's inflation, immigration, and the incompetence they see in Washington. So I think inflation is the #1 concern of everybody right now. The cost of living has gone up to where it's not sustainable. We cannot continue on this trajectory. Our energy policy needs to be reversed immediately, because if we could get energy going again, then that will resolve a lot of this. But this open border immigration is an absolute catastrophe as well, and a real threat to the sovereignty and safety and security of our country. You begin working on those things. The Republican majority will also have some real oversight responsibility. It's going to be a new day in Washington, and we can't wait, because I think it's a long time coming.
Representative Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, the vice chair of the Republican conference, joining us. Thanks for your time.
Thanks so much.